This episode of Tales from Aztlantis is brought to you by Aztlantis Premium. Don't you just hate having your favorite podcast interrupted by ads like this? Well, dear listener, you're in luck. Because starting at just $3 a month, you can support independent Chicano media and receive ad-free episodes, premium episodes, bonus content, and access to our Discord server. Just visit talesfromaztlantis.com and click Go Premium, or follow the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show.
Lord, we give you Kurly. Try not to piss him off.
Piali no chime, and welcome to the very first dispatch from Aztlantis of Season 4. I am your host, Kurly Tlapoyawa, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about these manuscripts, these codices that were recently acquired by the Mexican government. It's really fascinating stuff, and I'm looking here at Smithsonian Magazine on their website. The headline reads, Mexican government acquires rare centuries-old Aztec manuscripts. The 16th and 17th century artifacts provide historical accounts of events such as the founding of Tenochtitlan. And this is really interesting for a number of reasons, right? The fact that this family who has asked to remain anonymous, what we do know from what the stories are saying is that they were not collectors, but rather they saw themselves as keepers of traditions. And so they had these manuscripts in their possession. And the article, I'm going to read from the article here. It says, the Mexican government has acquired 3 illustrated Aztec codices from the late 16th to early 17th centuries that have been passed down within one family for generations. The newly purchased documents, known as the Codices of San Andres de Tepilco, are written in Spanish and the indigenous Nahuatl language. One of them provides an account of the founding of Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City. Maria Castañeda de la Paz, a historian at the University of Seville who helped locate the codices, first learned about the documents in 2009. So this was like 15 years ago that people were first made aware of the existence of these documents. The article continues, a colleague told her of a friend in Mexico City who possessed some potentially interesting manuscripts. So she went to see them for herself. This is as reported by El País's Carlos Maldonado. It's not every day you come across documents like this, Castañeda de la Paz tells the publication. I was thrilled and surprised because documents about the history of Tenochtitlan are very rare. Mexican citizens are allowed to keep important historical artifacts from this era as long as they don't take them out of the country. So this is an interesting piece of antiquity law that not a lot of people are familiar with. But if you are a Mexican citizen and you have in your possession something related to the cultural heritage of Mexico, of Mesoamerica, you are allowed to hold on to them. You're not required to hand them over to a government agency, so long as you do not remove them from the country, which I think is an important part of this. This month, Castañeda de la Paz and a team of experts announced the acquisition of the documents at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. The Mexican government paid the family, who has opted to remain anonymous, 9.5 million pesos, which is a little over $500,000 US for the manuscripts. These 3 documents are added to the 200 Mesoamerican codices of the approximately 550 that are recognized in the world in the custody of the BNAH, according to a statement from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History. And they're quoted, thanks to this transfer of ownership, the people of Mexico now hold the codices of San Andres Tetepilco. So there's a few interesting things here. One, that it took 15 years to acquire the documents, and that this family was paid a hefty sum to hand the documents over. So I'm hoping, and I know, I'm being optimistic, overtly optimistic here, that this means that the time and the money put into this means that the documents were properly vetted, that they were investigated, and that they were found to be authentic, that they were authenticated to be actual, pieces of cultural heritage and not a hoax or not some sort of forgeries. And just looking at the images that are available online, they all, and this is just from photos, but they all seem to appear legitimate. Most of the fraudulent codices or hoaxes are pretty easy to distinguish. Even just by looking at a photograph from one of them, you could tell pretty quickly that what you're looking at is a fake. And I say this because, I hope that they're authentic. I hope that they've been authenticated, because this sounds eerily similar to, what happened in Ixcateopan, Guerrero, with the Salvador Juarez family, where they, handed over these documents to the Mexican government, stating that they showed that Cuauhtemoc, the last sovereign Tlatoani of the Mexica Empire, was buried in Ixcateopan. And the Mexican government, in this zeal, right, nationalistic fervor going on at the time, accepted them on face value at first. And this is something we're going to be covering in the podcast much more deeply at a later date. But needless to say, this family passed off fraudulent documents that they had. It was a hoax. They were forgeries, and as well as the alleged tomb of Cuauhtemoc, right? Cuauhtemoc's bones. They're not actually Cuauhtemoc's bones. Spoiler alert, they are not Cuauhtemoc's bones. But yet to this day, people in the hundreds will, go to the town of Ixcateopan. They'll hold this mass pilgrimage, and there's numerous days of danza, and it's all very beautiful. There's nothing wrong with honoring Cuauhtemoc as the last Tlatoani. That's perfectly legitimate. I'm not criticizing that. But the idea that this is his final resting place, that these are his bones, is completely fraudulent. And this was carried out by this family from Ixcateopan. So I'm seeing similarities here of a family turning over these long lost documents. However, the main difference is the family in Ixcateopan used them to further their own political gain within the community and to raise their status in the community. Whereas this other family, this recent family, is choosing to remain anonymous, and they don't want to be known. They did get paid for these documents, and there's nothing wrong with that. People need to eat, but I'm really hoping that the documents are authentic. And speaking of fake codices, I was also reminded of the Codex Porrua, and I have in my hand this is a really good book. It's not perfect because I don't agree with everything in this book, obviously, but there's this great book called Faking Ancient Mesoamerica by Nancy L. Kelker and Karen O. Bruns. And in it, they go into this entire cottage industry of fake documents, of forgeries and hoaxes. And one of the more infamous fake codices that they speak about is the Codex Porrua. It's also known as the Manuscrito Pictórico de la Cultura Maya sobre Piel de Mamífero, or the Codex Porrua. And I'm going to read from this book because it's pretty fascinating. It says this book of 105 pages, painted on animal skin of unidentified species, was published in 1957 by the Libreria Manuel Porrua in Mexico City. As is usually the case with new finds, legitimate or otherwise, the publication of the erstwhile Maya Codex was heralded with enthusiasm among the ranks of aficionados of pre-Columbiana and the more gullible amateur anthropologists. One of the manuscript's enthusiastic supporters, Domingo Martinez Paredes, wow, so we've covered Domingo Martinez Paredes in the podcast. He is responsible for the fake, Inlac etch, for promoting the non-Maya Hunab coup. And this guy's just had his hands in every bit of pseudo-history, pseudo-archaeology, and just complete nonsense for quite some time. So it should come as no surprise that his name pops up here. But Domingo Martinez Paredes published a book about this particular codex, and we're going to go into it further in a later episode, but I just want to touch on it briefly here. It says, not all were deceived by the forgery. The newly printed copies of the Codex Porrua had barely reached the shelves of the Libreria before it was resoundingly denounced as a fraud by the Mexican journalist and scholar Cesar Lizardi Ramos. What Lizardi Ramos saw immediately and the others apparently missed was that the manuscript was a prime example of that kind of 19th century conceit that saw all native cultures as part of a universal, undifferentiated, and interchangeable Indian. Where earlier forgers had more or less confined their borrowings to the Dresden Codex, the Porrua forger was global in his approach, merging images and motifs collected from all three Maya codices, Mixtec painted vessels, the Codex Zuchnutal, Aztec sculptures, including the stone of Titzoc, illustration plates from scholarly publications, and for good measure, adding in a few Chinese-style dragons. So when you look at the Codex Porrua, this is one of those instances where unless you're completely clueless, you can look at it and see immediately that something is wrong, that the styles are a mishmash, that it's not very well drawn, that the pages are all of different sizes, that the Maya images, they don't even use Maya numerals correctly in the codex. But the main part of this codex that sticks out, if you look at it, of the Codex Porrua, is it has some extremely sexual images in it. Extremely sexualized imagery of men and women engaging in sex and preparing for sex. They don't look authentic at all. They don't look like Maya illustrations. It just looks like some schoolboy's fantasy of like a Maya Kama Sutra or something. And I bring this up because lately I've been hearing a lot online of, if you're in the danza community, I'm sure you've been seeing it as well, these allegations being made towards certain alleged teachers in the danza community regarding sexual impropriety. And we'll just leave it at that. And it concerns me that these people, these alleged elders and leaders, might turn to a book, a fake codex like the Codex Porrua, with its sexual imagery, and try to pass it off as some sort of authentic ceremony, right? Some sort of authentic representation of the cultural inheritance of Mesoamerica. And these people might abuse their positions of authority to entice, young people or just individuals who earnestly want to know more about their culture and who can be taken in by, these highly respected people, and that they might be using fake codices like these to advance their own sexually abusive nature. And that concerns me. So I'm hoping that is not happening, and I hope it doesn't happen. And that's why I want to alert people that if anybody's pointing to the Codex Porrua as if it were an authentic Maya codex, and saying, look, we had our own Kama Sutra, and then trying to get people to participate in this. And even worse, I imagine, being paid for it, charging money for these phony baloney ceremonies that they got from this fake codex that they're trying to pass off as some sort of ancestral knowledge. It concerns me. I'm not saying that this is what is happening, but it worries me that it is a possibility that something like this could happen. So I want everybody out there to always, cast a skeptical eye when people show them, some ancient piece of hidden esoteric knowledge, especially when they're trying to charge you money for it, and especially when sex is involved. Timoitase. Thank you for listening to Tales from Aztlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromaztlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timoitase.